Hello viewers, my name is Andrew Dean. I'm the Vice President of Research and Innovation at Lakehead University, inviting you to another edition of Research Matters. Today we meet Dr. David Greenwood, a professor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University. His research interests are in place-based, environmental, sustainability, and holistic education. Dr. Greenwood initiated the Lakehead University Labyrinth project and learning community during back-to-back positions as a Canada Research Chair in Environmental Education and Sustainability. The Labyrinth became a focal point for the Centre of Place and Sustainability from 2010 to 2020 at Lakehead. He's also joined by Dr. Aaron Cameron, an assistant professor in medical education at Nauseam University and director of the Dr. Gilles Arcan Centre for Health Equity. So, welcome David and Aaron, really glad to have you here.
Thank you.
David, could you perhaps please just share and set the context of your research interests?
Sure. Well, you named them there. It's a confluence of environmental sustainability, place-based, and holistic education. And that's a mouthful, but what it comes down to is that I wonder as an educator what kind of education we need now in the world. That's always been the guiding question behind all of my work. It's related to the question, how do we want to live now? And the answers to those questions will drive what kind of education we provide as universities or schools. And I want to give a little bit of a context of the big picture in which the Labyrinth project emerged. And that big picture is that we live in a time of massive change. And we have wicked problems everywhere that are confounding the best minds in the world. We don't know how to solve them quickly. They're huge problems, and everyone's involved at some level. So what to do? There's a mentor of mine named Joanna Macy, who has established a framework that I think is really helpful in thinking about the world we live in and what we need to do to respond to it. And she says that we're simultaneously living three different stories. The first story, we're all very familiar with, she calls the Great Unraveling. You know, this is the description of the world in a time of climate change, mass migration, economic breakdown, and violent conflict. And we can see these things coming together all over the world every time we pick up the newspaper or look at the news feeds on our phones. The Great Unraveling is a reality that we all face. Another story, because it's not all gloom, is one she calls the Great Turning. And that is this huge, interconnected, worldwide movement to do things differently, to create better lives and better livelihoods all over the world. And I think research in universities across the world are all focused on that mission, trying to enact the Great Turning in a time of the Great Unraveling. This is front burner for all of us. The problem is the third story. And the third story she calls business as usual. And business as usual is used to describe, it's a phrase used to describe the great inertia causing us to keep doing what we're doing instead of making the major changes that we know we need. So again, climate change is a great example of this. We just finished another meeting for the Conference of Parties, and we have a new global agreement that looks like it's going to fall short of what science says we need in order to avoid massive climate breakdown. Why? Because business as usual is driving the show, despite the fact that we have all this wonderful activity globally for the Great Turning. So, how does this translate into education? What I think we need all over the place in businesses, in communities, in universities, and families is a really close look at business as usual and to create space to make change. And spaces that we need will cause us to stop what we're doing, to pause, and to deeply reflect. And building a labyrinth for me, there were many reasons behind it, but in this context of the need for change, I wanted a place where we could come together as diverse communities and stop what we're doing long enough to deeply reflect, talk to each other about who we are and what our hopes are for the future. And that's what we've been using the Labyrinth for, is a space for contemplative practice. So that's a little bit of a background on why we have a labyrinth and what its function is.
That's great. That's really good. Really great have that introduction there. Aaron, I understand that Lakehead Labyrinth has been involved with NOSM's, Dr. Gil Zarkan's Center for Health Equity. Can you tell us a little bit more about the center and tell us how you and your center have also been involved in the Labyrinth?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. The Center for Health Equity is really a new research center within NOSM University. It was started in 2021, and when the Labyrinth got built on Lakehead University, and I actually was involved in painting this labyrinth that's behind me, and involved from the beginning of the conversations and the engagement of this contemplative space. How do we bring both minds and our bodies into this space to find new ways of learning and pausing from the work, from the everyday? And so when it got finished, I reached out to Gavin and to David to say, can the center staff, we've just come out of the pandemic, we are tech burnt, we've been online too much, we need to actually find ways of walking together and to thinking about and learning from each other. And so we did that. We actually had the chance to walk the Labyrinth together as a center, the center team. So very much a team building, but also a learning from, with, and about the team through the Labyrinth. So it was a really great tool, education tool, but also a tool of research to be able to say, where are we going with research, but how can we do so mindfully, pausing and asking what are the questions, not only of ourselves as researchers, but also of this place here in Thunder Bay. So very much akin to place-based education, that's an important part, that it's not education for somewhere, it's education somewhere in a place.
That's really interesting. Also, one might think that, a labyrinth, a place of meditation, a place of contemplation, a place to pause in some sense, but to also think of it as a tool and a research and a way to move beyond that business as usual kind of place.
Yeah, that was something that we discovered when we started walking together, is that when we walk a labyrinth as a group, there are two phases to it. One, we all enter this very unique space. It's a spiral path moving from the circumference of a circle into the center. And everyone has their own individual walk, but we're doing it collectively. Usually our group walks are initiated with a prompt so that people are asked to think about a particular question when they walk. And so they have that experience of reflecting on something important to their lives or their work. I wonder if you remember a question that was for your group. Do you remember one of the questions we used for your group, Erin?
I think just in this time of COVID, what is coming out, and how can we be better together? Going back to that question, right? Of how do we live well in this place? How can we do so as an institution, a university, a research team, as researchers, as a group?
And so what we found is that's a question that's often posed in meeting rooms on campus. But to pose it in a space where you're able to have an embodied, sustained experience of reflection, and then to have a facilitated conversation afterwards about how you experienced walking with that question, it just evokes a very different set of responses.
That's great. Okay, we're going to take a short break here and continue our discussion with David and more members of the research team after the break. Welcome back. You're watching Research Matters, brought to you by Lakehead University. So in this segment, we have Gavin Shields joining us. Gavin holds a master's degree in education and was one of the graduate students, maybe the main graduate students involved in Lakehead University's Labyrinth project. Thanks for being here, Gavin. So please share your academic background, research interests, and current roles as it relates to the Labyrinth project.
Yeah, cool. Well, the Labyrinth was such a gift in my journey as a learner, like as a father, right, as a husband, just it all, right? I really think of the Labyrinth as one place to hold one's whole heart, right? To bring all of oneself across these different layers of the onion, kind of. So I stumbled into it. This is a great story. So I, in my undergrad, I'd started being involved in a lot of community-based work, and it moved me through questions of where I came from. And I was working with actually a counselor who came out to our Labyrinth Learning community walks. And I remember just being in this session and realize, like, oh, does this mean like I have to take responsibility for my own life? Like there's no Dodgerettes or whatsoever. So she said, yeah. I walked out. I walked into the Agora where larger canvas Labyrinth was. I looked at the bus stop. There's 7 minutes. So I think I can do it. Took off my shoes, walked the Labyrinth, went outside. The bus was disappearing down the Agora Circle, and David Greenwood walked up. And that was the first time we talked in depth. And that led to doing a master's with David. Just moving through, I think, these layers of the narratives you mentioned, right? The great turning, great unraveling. How do we get out of business of business as usual, right? It was just this, okay, it's a journey, right? From the circumference, right? Looking at everything to the center, to the place of heart, right? And I think of the Labyrinth, right? One thing I really like to mention about the Labyrinth is it's thought of as a non-linear process, but it's a path where if you follow that path, like if you come to the Lakehead campus and walk the path, it's almost or wisdom traditions around the world have talked about it as a walk of faith, basically, where if you trust the path, it will lead you to the center. So it can be thought of as a non-linear thing, but I actually think of it's a linear thing, but with orbits, with cycles, with a deepening, right? Like thinking of not just on one dimension, but like you're going in, you're journeying in, like a descent into a valley, or you're coming out and you're getting a greater view through that reflective praxis, right? The action and reflection of what to do next, right? How to respond to these times. And last thing I'd name, just in this little introduction piece, is through the Masters, actually 2 children, my daughter and my son, were born through this. So David as a guide and a mentor, Labyrinth keeper, right, held that, opened the gates and held that. So,
Great.
yeah.
And so what about maybe some of the future plans for the Labyrinth? You know, can the public, have access to it or feel they can have some kind of association with it?
Oh yeah, well, definitely, yeah. So it's open for anybody. It's on campus, right by the Faculty of Education building, the Boer Alaskan there. It's right off the bike path. I'd say it's open 24/7. I've gone out in the dark and walked. I've gone out sort of any time. I was there at lunch today, and there were 3 deer that were just grazing by there, and yeah, it's.
So what I hear you saying, Gavin, too, is that the Labyrinth is a space for other ways of knowing than the traditional idea of just linear rational thought and cognitive processing that's often associated with academic work. And so this is another important element of trying to transition out of business as usual. We hear a lot of talk about other ways of knowing, for example, when we talk about indigenous peoples and different epistemologies that people are conditioned in. And certainly at a university, we're very conditioned in one particular way of knowing, which is cognitive. We pretty much exclude the body and what Gavin described as the heart and the spirit, which are really a big part of all contemplative practices. And it's what I think attracts people to the labyrinth and also helps to create these very different kinds of collective experiences. Because people are invited to have an embodied, wholehearted experience in a way that they generally don't get access to in university classrooms or meeting rooms. So when people walk by on the bike path from the public and from the community, they're accessing the labyrinth for a very similar purpose, to really get in touch with themselves. Not just thinking about their lives, but feeling who they are and where they're going and what it's all about. And that's what contemplative practices have been for thousands of years. So the labyrinth is part of a resurgence of a movement toward contemplative practices in higher education, which really is a worldwide movement that Gavin's been a big part of in his master's work.
Do people feel they need any kind of special instructions or training or ideas about how to walk the labyrinth in the most useful manner, shall I say?
Yeah, I could jump in, and I think there is a facilitated walk. I think David outlined a little bit of this in our first session, right? People walk together, but they're on their own walks, and there's often a prompt. But then following that walk, we've always done a listening circle or a speaking circle where people are able to share their reflections, right? And it's so neat to see when, like I think of Aaron's center, right, when they came, just the sympathetic resonance that happens in a group when we come together. And I'd say deeper than just like, there's so many perspectives, but deeper than perspective, what I think this tool does is it gives us vision where we can speak to across time, how do we want to move together, and how do we want to calibrate and feel these regions of learning, of thought, and even I think of even further than just learning of, okay, when we learn, what are we going to create, and where are we going to create from, right? How to bring the heart out of the labyrinth and move that towards the hands, right? So many pieces. It's a really neat process.
I get the impression it can be kind of something one would do in a team or a group, but also very much one that's individually. There's also a value as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The film that Gavin made a few years ago, actually Aaron, who was here earlier, was part of that film. And I can remember her response to one of the questions, and that was that the labyrinth is a place of pause. And we all know how busy everyone is, and how much our lives are on hyperdrive, and how much we're juggling, and how the pace of things continues to accelerate. Everyone's ready for a little bit of a break, and this isn't like shirking responsibility. This is the kind of care at the heart of what the discourse of wellness should be about. We need to learn to take care of ourselves and to pause. And so to have a place on campus where you can go by yourself and move into a walking contemplation or a walking meditation in a beautiful green environment with lots of indigenous plants. I think it's a very huge asset to our university community to have such a space where people can go and literally unwind in this meditative garden.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, Gavin. We're going to take another short break. We'll be right back with another member of David's research team. Welcome back. In this segment, we're joined by Devon Lee, Sustainability Coordinator at Lakehead University. So Devon, what was your role in the creation of the Labyrinth?
I worked on this project as a graduate assistant for about 3 years, I think, David. David and I had been working together for a number of years, and he phoned me when I began my PhD at the university and asked me if I wanted to sort of help out with this project. And I didn't know at all what a labyrinth was at the time, but I said sure, because I thought that if David was this passionate about it, it was going to be something important and something needed. And of course it was, and we know that now. And so I supported that. in terms of the creation of the Canvas Labyrinth, and then trying to introduce this to the university community. And of course now we have 2 labyrinths at the university that are there in real time. And so really from more or less the beginning till today, I've been involved. And then as sustainability coordinator, of course, we're working with faculty and staff across and beyond the university, really, as well as students. So we incorporate the labyrinths in our sustainability tour. We do a lot of work on pedagogy with the labyrinth, how you might use that in your teaching or research. And then we work with a number of classes each term as well to really give them the experience of the labyrinth.
Okay, you talked a little bit about it, how it's currently being used. And, you know, I remember the evolution of the labyrinth at Lakehead University sort of involves a bit of fundraising to get money, probably also involved maybe convincing some people as to, you know,
I
we
think
really
David,
need this on the campus.
David had
or
done
not?
that by the time I came on board, so maybe he can.
Well, it is a journey. To do something that's not business as usual, to use that language again, requires advocacy and, most importantly, relationships. So the Labyrinth, I think, was successful because we built a Labyrinth community made up of faculty, staff, and students from probably 12 different university departments for our initial core group. But even beyond that, my relationships with people like yourself, Andy, and other people in the senior administration were extremely important. It gave me the confidence to come and talk about this idea as something that's innovative and potentially of great benefit for the long term to the university. And without those relationships in place, this project never would have been approved or funded. And I mention that too because the Labyrinth is also a place to build relationships and to strengthen relationships, especially in existing groups. So Devon knows this better than anyone. We've hosted dozens and scores of different kinds of groups, from classes to research seminars, local nonprofits. We've hosted scores of different groups to help them build community within their organization or within their classroom. And I think that's one of the chief benefits of the Labyrinth, is this space to deepen relationships and to ask challenging questions.
That's really good to hear. So you know, for others, the public or organizations, you know, maybe using that as a labyrinth or as a team building kind of thing or a contemplative area, that's available?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is something, it needs to be facilitated. Currently, we don't have a seamless way to access facilitation. And facilitation is something that takes some training. But really, anyone can do it once they've experienced the Labyrinth and if they have some facilitation skills. So it's not difficult to learn how to do that. But with any sort of group facilitation, it's important to have some experience. Yeah.
Reminds me a little bit about meditation. I know it's not exactly the same, but you know, quite often people know the value of meditation, but they feel very intimidated because they don't know how. You know, so just having that little bit of an introduction, and you can kind of take it on your own journey in some sense.
Yeah. Maybe Devon, do you want to share a little bit of how we've introduced this to the groups when they come out for a walk as a practice that includes meditative walking?
Yeah, so when we have a group, and I think it would be important to note that we've tried this with, you know, people who've never met each other before. They're coming together for the first time for a conference. We've tried this with, say, university classes at the end of their term. They've been together for a while. We've tried this with sort of groups of strangers from the community. So there's all different sort of entry points, I think, for relationship building in the Labyrinth. But, you know, when folks come out, typically we have a bit of a talk. Gavin, I think, mentioned earlier that we have a listening circle that happens after the walk. We typically introduce the Labyrinth. You know, we mentioned that it's secular. It's existed all over the world for thousands of years in really an enigmatic way. No one's entirely sure, you know, how they've popped up where they have. we talk a little bit about the logistics of the walk, David, in terms of, walk at your own pace, you can pass somebody, because again, if we have a lot of people together, they are meditating, as you mentioned, Andy, but it's a little bit new, I think, to think about how to negotiate this space with others. And we talk about a singular path that's not meant to confuse you or make you lost. It's not a maze, even though it looks like that. And then often we walk back out. We host a listening circle where folks don't really respond to each other. Everyone sort of just says their own piece. And those have been really, I think, one of the bright spots, David, of the Labyrinth, is the listening circle. And it's sort of a bonus. I think it's integral, but it's been such a bonus to...
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes it so successful is that, and I've seen you ask people this countless times, is that it comes after an experience of being together quietly. So the first part of our experience together as a group, there's no talking. And isn't that a different way to be together at a university? I mean, as a professor, as a longtime teacher, people are really uncomfortable with silence. But that's really the background at the heart of meditation. We need to become more comfortable with quiet and silence so that we can hear and feel ourselves. And it's from that place then that people come together and share on a deeper level after being able to hear and feel how they really are.
I really want to thank you, David, Aaron, Gavin, and Devon for speaking to me today. I wish you all the best in your future projects. So engaging with the Labyrinth induces participants to contemplative education, social accountability, and its use as an ancient technological tool, Labyrinth learning, I'm going to say. Walking the Labyrinth allows us to be more present and be engaged with ourselves in our work and in our futures, an important endeavor in our increasing busy world. As you say, time to pause. Thank you for joining us today for this edition of Research Matters. Until next time, my name is Andrew Dean, Vice President of Research and Innovation at Lakehead University, and wishing you the very best.